Welcome to Season 6 of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who believe the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode is brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. So welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by the fabulous Allison Gerrard, who is the Director of Education and Training at Moral Courage, which is an organization that teaches people to communicate with empathy across divides. Allison did her postgraduate studies in behavioral science and is committed to cultivating caring and inclusive environments. She's joining us from Utah. I'm delighted to welcome you to the show, Allison.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here as well. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Super. So let's start with something really basic. What is moral courage and why is it needed?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So if you were to Google moral courage, you would get things like speaking truth to power. And I'll tell you, that has been easy for me throughout my life in that sort of definition. And what I mean by that is, from the time I was a little girl, I couldn't tolerate any sort of cruelty. And so I would stand up to people. And I remember this time in middle school, there was a boy being teased behind me in my social studies class. And one day I just couldn't handle it. And I just turned around and said, "Leave him alone." Well, there were certain consequences to that because then the boy started to like me, but that's a whole other story. But, you know, this is kind of the way I grew up. You stand up for what you believe in, not a lot of attention to how you say it. So moral courage, the way we define it at the Moral Courage Project, is speaking truth to the power of our own ego. And so let me just compare those two definitions very quickly. So the first definition, speaking truth to power, that locates power exclusively and only out there. So, you know, tech titans, the media moguls, the politicians, the protesters, they all have power, but my side does not, and I do not. And so with moral courage, we say each of us has power. And this is not, you know, a self-helpy way to think about it. This is grounded in biology. So, you know, we all have these egocentric tendencies. And if we really want to, you know, if I really care about standing up against injustices, I'm going to have to craft my message in a way that people will want to hear me. So we teach people how to speak about the things they really care about and to build relationships and collaboration across divides.
Wow. I can't wait to unpack this a little bit further. What's the backstory of Moral Courage Project?
Well, Irshad Manji is our founder, and she's written 2 books on reforming Islam. And so her history of speaking truth to power, I think, was similar to mine. You know, you stand up for what's right, you do what's right in the face of your fears. And she speaks about this in her book, Don't Label Me. That way of approaching her work took a real toll on her physically and mentally. And she tells this story of being in the NBC building, preparing for an interview on the Today Show, and having a massive seizure. And she was out so long that when she had finally woken up, the paramedics were already on, I think she said, the 4th or 5th floor of the NBC building. And it could have killed her. And so her doctors told her, "You cannot continue to approach your work this way. We will not treat you if you do this because, you know, your life is in danger." And so over the next couple of years, she really had to reevaluate how she was approaching her work. She would go into, conversations, treating it like it was a debate. You know, people would punch her verbally and she would counterpunch. And so she also talks about going into a forum. I can't remember the name of the forum, but she decided that she was going to go in and acknowledge when the other side made a very good point. So she would take time to collect her thoughts, she would say, that's a very good point. Let me think about my response. And this was her way of speaking truth to the power of her ego. Now, I will say she prepared herself before going into those conversations by deep breathing, right? We need to calm our stress response system, because when we're stressed, we become more egocentric. And so there's a lot of habits that she had to build to, approach her work differently. And so she's created this nonprofit organization, the Moral Courage Project, to teach others how to do the same. And so, yeah.
Well, it strikes me as so timely, because we're all being triggered and we're all in these little ideological bubbles, arguing talking points, but the talking points are actually really painful, because we are attacking each other, ad hominem attacks if you have a certain belief system, and we're really not spending much time listening or building bridges. So the program that you run, which I want to ask you about, helps to build bridges and listen and communicate with this moral courage, which allows us to really hear each other and give space to each other. Is that what I'm understanding? That's what the program's about?
Yeah, well, we work with, it could be just small groups and communities. It can be organizations, academia, K through 12. We teach people how to have conversations and not judge immediately. Like, we're humans. We all judge. We do this all the time. It's what we do. But we teach people who have strong opinions that differ how to sit and hold space and hear a differing opinion without prematurely judging or judging all of who that person is just by this simple difference. So, and this is what's really important about this. You can't really solve the problems we need to solve today if we're not putting all the ideas on the table. So this is really about, a different kind of diversity, meaning diversity of viewpoint, where, we need to make sure everybody's ideas come to the table.
So I want to share a little story with you, if you'll indulge me, Allison, on how I came to know about your work in the first place. So I have been teaching for more than 10 years, and I have a profound love for that role of being a teacher in a classroom. And I love my students, and I'm in touch with like 600 alums. So it's like, it's an important place in my life space that is very connected in my identity. I'm an educator and I love my students. And it's a two-way relationship that I deeply, deeply honor. And last semester was the first time I went back into the classroom since we had a year of virtual learning, thanks to COVID. And it was a different experience in the classroom. The students were different. So it's a new generation coming up the pike with a different set of lived experiences. They'd all lived through COVID. They'd lived through George Floyd, massive protests around race reckoning, and had lived their lives on Twitter and other social media platforms for the last, 18 months. But I still wasn't prepared for the way, cancel culture was going to manifest in the classroom. And I may be over dramatizing it, but from my previous lived experience, it felt qualitatively different. And I felt at the risk of being canceled. Right. And I felt triggered by feelings of shame in my own classroom, which was brand new to me and horrifying to me. And I found that some students were speaking, the language of social justice that I actually do align with philosophically and politically, but the manner in which they were expressing themselves felt so over militarized, like very militant, that I could feel that they were silencing other students in the class who just had a different opinion and might not be on the same curve as them, but might be willing to if the conversation allowed for, more nuance and more critical thinking and reflection. So I found myself really perplexed and wondering whether or not I was going to continue teaching, because if this is the new way of classrooms, then I'm not interested. And it was through a conversation with a friend of mine who talked about the Moral Courage Project's work, and that's how I came to understand what you do. And I'll just read to you from your website, and then I want to ask more about the program. Your website says, Behavioral science repeatedly shows that what humans fear more than anything is being judged. When we feel shamed, blamed, or labeled unworthy by those who we respect, we covet, we become defensive. The result, more division. A diverse society needs people to engage with empathy, which means learning communication skills that heal existing divides and prevent new ones, whether in or beyond school. So just to close the loop on my story, I shared with lots of people, including former students, who also admitted to me that they have been caught up in the cancel culture and have lost friends and blocked friends because of having different opinions, but then they find themselves lonely and feeling without a sense of belonging in the world. So I was like, wow, at a time when so much of what we're facing in the world requires collaboration, we need to find ways to work together across difference. So this is the worst possible time for us to kind of be divisive with each other. So I'm kind of concerned about humanity going forward at that very high level. And ultimately, through some work, reviewing some Brené Brown on shame and belonging, I discovered that what I needed to do was actually really step into a place of courage and vulnerability and share with my students how I was feeling in my own classroom and talk about what I'd observed and how it felt for me. And it was an incredible conversation. I have goosebumps just thinking about it. And I think that maybe that's what your Moral Courage Project is about. So now the platform is yours. Tell us what it's all about.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that really stuck out to me, that you love teaching, but you were confronted with this thought that maybe you couldn't do it anymore because of how things were going in the classroom. I mean, that's pretty incredible. And I think a lot of people are feeling the same thing. I know that I felt the same way too. I went back to college later in my life once I got my youngest son into school. So this is about 6 years ago. And I remember I enrolled in a class for social work. And the first day of class, the instructors were saying, part of the class was we were going to work with youth in high schools, these youth groups with underserved teens. And they told us you are not to ask them certain questions. They're not going to teach you what you need to know about their experience. And I remember thinking, I don't know what's going on. This is supposed to be a college classroom, but there's all these rules around what I can say and what I can't say. And then I felt that it was a barrier to learning as well. So just as a student, that's what I was experiencing. And then just really quickly, one more experience that I had in that class, we had a group discussion one day about, something you wouldn't know by looking at you. And so we go around the room and, the discussion got a little bit lively, and people started to attack other members of the same group. So, this woman, she identified as part of the LGBTQ community, but started critiquing certain people that wore makeup or certain people that dressed differently. And my point is this: there's something going on where there's so much, you can take offense so easily, and then you judge others so easily. And I don't think people are even understanding how they're coming across or how defensive they're being. Now, I have a daughter that I have conversations with her all the time about this kind of stuff. And, I think part of it is they're on social media. Their attention span is, Johann Hari wrote in his book, his newest book I have here, Stolen Focus, that the average attention span of a teenager, or even probably some adults, is 60 seconds. You can't really think deeply about issues if that's kind of where your attention's going. So the role that Moral Courage plays is we get people together and we have conversations about some of these things, and there's enough time where we can unpack it. And we, really emphasize everybody has a backstory. If you think about the way the brain develops, for the first, 13, 14, 15 years, we're brain builders. We're tuning and pruning to our environment. We're learning what our caregivers, just by how much they hold us or how they soothe us or not. We're learning about the world, and we're starting to build our idea of what relationships are. And we're open to learning. But then we get into the teenage years and up into, like maybe the age of your students, and it switches. We become defenders. So whatever culture, relationships, ideas, values that we've absorbed, we defend it. And it has to do with, our amygdala is so exquisitely sensitive to threat. I don't know if you've heard this, but it was fascinating that it scans the environment for threat 5 times per second. Like 5 times per second. So this is what's going on. You have kids that are attached to their media. It seems there's threat everywhere. They're overly stressed, overly defensive. And the amygdala is tied to 3 very important social networks in the brain. And so everything, I think, can seem more threatening, even a comment. You can read that person meant me harm. And that's another thing that we talk about in moral courage is we need to learn to take offense and not react so quickly, and learn to offend ourselves. Meaning, let's take a look at the role we play. What is my ego saying I need to do right now? If I'm reacting more than responding, that's a good clue that your ego is running the show. And so we teach people how to, let's take a couple deep breaths. Let's really think about our thoughts, our emotions, and then move forward in a way that's responsive and productive so that we're not, amplifying this us against them war.
I mean, I think this work is so critical. And I think it's really important to drive home this idea that we as human beings hate feeling judged. Mm-hmm. And we will defend ourselves almost at all cost, because judgment is connected to fear of being separated from the group, right? I mean, like we've evolved as creatures as a result of that, right? So it's embedded in our brains, and now we're living social lives that even like the hint of we don't like you or we don't like that idea, the fear of ostracization is what's catching our attention, and that's what we're reacting to, right?
Today's episode was brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies.
Because you certify mentors in your program, right? So they take the training and then they become certified mentors. How do they practice and teach purposeful empathy in the work that they do?
Well, I will tell you that we have our first cohort starting in April. So I haven't taken any mentors through, but I can tell you there's going to be, the first thing that they'll learn the first couple of weeks is kind of like what's going on in the social world. Why are we here? So the movement away from religion, we've got increased polarization, we've got this social media and the cancel culture. And then we take a really deep look at the role we might be playing in creating this. So that's where we talk about speaking truth to the power of our ego. So, we're all human. We all have cognitive biases. I mean, the most fascinating thing I've found on cognitive biases is Buster Benson's, I have it on my wall, Cognitive Bias Codex. There's nearly 200 biases, and they're meant to help us make predictions so we know how to be in the world. Our brains want to do 2 things. Keep you, one main thing, keep you alive. And the most taxing thing it can do is learn something new and move your body. So these biases are there for a reason. So we learn, the mentors will learn, how about their own humanity, how they're wired, how they show up in the world. And then we start to unpack maybe some of the biases that we have. And then so that we're not projecting onto the world, our own values and ideas, and we're really receptive and open to viewpoints from other people. And by doing this, we can refine kind of like our ideas of what social justice means, and we can work towards productive, sustainable social change. So we'll send mentors out across the world to be able to do this and to model it and to teach it.
So important. I wonder, since you've started working with moral courage and you've obviously prior to that been interested in these topics, otherwise you wouldn't be in the role that you're in. How is what you've learned about ego and communication and holding space and all of that, how has that changed and opened things up for you in your personal relationships? You kind of alluded to it with your daughter, but maybe, you know.
Well, so I really think the reason why I have this job right now is because of the work I was doing 7 years ago. So, you know, when I was younger, I was very judgmental. I mean, I was judgmental and I had a quick tongue and I could take people down pretty quickly. When I reached about 38 or 40, it was no longer sustainable. Why? Because the way I was parenting, it was not effective and it was not kind and it was not compassionate and it was controlling and I think I was centered on myself. These kids were going to love me. They were going to respect me. And I learned a lot of this growing up in, you know, my family. And it was causing some real damage. And I remember 40 years old in November, a couple of weeks before Thanksgiving, I was becoming depressed, becoming anxious. My marriage was suffering because of it. I literally was on the ground one day thinking, I'm sick. I am sick. I need medication. I need something. And, you know, and my family was saying, yeah, you are. You need to go. You know? So I reached out and I found a therapist. And this was my first experience of real empathy. I sat there and I talked about my life experiences. And I just imagined her picking me up and saying, you're okay. You're okay. Knowing the life experiences you've had, your behavior makes sense. The way that you're moving in your life makes sense. And so, you know, I worked with her over the next couple of years unpacking things. And I'll tell you, the best lesson I've learned is you can't give what you don't have. I can't give empathy unless I have it for myself first, you know. And when I started to do that work for myself and speaking truth to the power of the ego. And now the ego can be manipulative. It can tell you you're crap or it can tell you you're amazing. Grandiosity and shame, both ego. So I had to really learn to love myself, to not puff up when I wanted to. I grew up in a family where if you were the best, you were safe. So being the best was the job I had to do. And that's not a fun person to be around, right? Because we need to everyone wants to feel like they play a role. So these are the things I had to unpack. And thankfully, I was able to do this and be available for my oldest daughter at the time that she needed it. And I'll tell you, a superpower empathy is when you can hold someone when they're really hurting and going through things. And you're not giving in to trying to control it, but just be with it. I know I haven't given you details there, but yeah. And so I think empathy starts with yourself. Can't give what you don't have. But then I think there's another form of empathy that's like, there's easy empathy. I can be empathic toward my kids and my husband. They're mine, right? They're mine. Mm-hmm. The harder thing is, do I have empathy for this person that I think is awful? This person that their ideas are disgusting. They could be. This person I've labeled as my other. Mm-hmm. Empathy really gets its power when I think it's consistent. It's not reserved for one side. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what I've been practicing, and it's hard work. You have to do it every day, and the mentors that come through the program will be learning to do that as well.
So exciting. So if people want to learn more about upcoming, how often will you do the certification?
We are looking at 2 times per year. So the program will be about 5 months long. And this first cohort starts April 17th. Applications are due by March 18th. And you can find the information at moralcourage.org. Also visit moralcourage.com for more information.
Wonderful. And it's all online, I would imagine, for those 5 months?
Well, we're doing 8 weeks online, and every week I'll be doing a presentation and we'll have a discussion. Then we do a 2-day boot camp. So Irshad will be there, and we're going to really dig in deep to the moral courage skills. And then we have a 2-week practicum where you watch Irshad deliver some of these workshops in, it might be K through 12 schools, or it could be an organization. And then they'll go out and finish with a capstone. So they have a month to actually take what they've learned and apply it in the real world. Whether it's, you could do something at the library, or you could do something within your organization where you work. And then you get a certificate from Oxford University, the Initiative for Global Ethics. Did you know that we're partnered with Oxford?
No.
Yeah. So they'll be certified through Oxford University. And we have a partnership with SHRM. That's the last thing. So the Society for Human Resources. So so we're accredited with them.
So who do you imagine in the cohort? Like, who are your ideal first cohort participants?
Well, they have to be doers. Okay. So it's easy to be inspired. It's easy to have an idea of something that they want to do, but they have to be able to actually put the work in. So we're looking for doers, and it's anybody who, honestly, I think I'm in Utah, and I'm not really sure how Irshad found me. She's in New York, I'm in Utah, but I had this sense like the world what's going on seems crazy. And it's what I know about psychology. I don't think this is going to end well unless we start to do some things differently. So anybody in any city or any town that's just like, this feels weird, I want to learn how to make a difference. If you care about an issue, you want to make change in your community, in your country, please apply. It's for everybody who wants to really make a difference.
So it's a train the trainer models, it sounds like, and information will be in the description below. This has been a fascinating conversation, and I want to thank you. I want to end with a personal question that I love to ask my guests around, if you can remember a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
Yeah. So this happened probably 4 days ago. It was very recent. I had been working a lot. I had been working on this college curriculum and not taking care of myself very well. And I let my husband have it. He's the sweetest guy. I honestly can sit here and he'll bring me dinner and he'll fill up my coffee. He's the sweetest guy, but I just had built up so much stress that I was mean to him. And the next day I went down and I apologized. I said, I just want you to know the way that I treated you was not okay. And the biggest gift that I think that I experienced this so much with him is he just says, I know it's okay. It's okay. I think when you allow people to make mistakes and you don't shut them out, shut them down, cast them out, you allow them to be sorry and you allow for there to be improvement and learning. And that's a gift.
It's a beautiful, touching story. I'm just going to keep going for just a minute longer because your story struck a nerve for me. One of the resources that I tapped when I was going through my whole kind of mid-semester crisis last semester was to be in touch with also a therapist who does many different kind of therapy modalities, including neuro-linguistic programming and hypnotherapy. And She was asking me to think about the time when I felt most shame in my classroom. And it was on the heels of having, I had a series of guest speakers. The class was called Ethics in Management. So I invited people who were out in the world of business from a variety of different sectors and perspectives to come in. So I had a guest speaker came, and he had told a great story. And when he left, one of the students asked me, "Where do you meet these people?" And it was the way the question was framed, where it wasn't like a curiosity question. It was laced with judgment. Like, where do you meet these people? As if like, they're from some, godforsaken place. And I was shamed by that question. I ended up telling a long story about how we met, but I gave tons of backstory that I didn't need to, which was just a bunch of filler to find, like, to get the students on my side sufficiently not to judge me on how I came to know this person. And I walked home and I was so angry with myself. I was like, well, how did that happen? So I was on the phone with this therapist, and she had me reflect on that circumstance. And then she asked me to think about a time in my life when I also felt a degree of shame with somebody who was close in my life. Yeah. And I won't go into all the details there either, but she brought me to the conclusion that so long as I am not able to forgive myself for my own imperfections and transgressions as a human being, I will always be triggered by feelings of shame, because if I am able to come to a place, and I know that that's a sense of knowing, you probably had the similar conversation with your therapist, when you're able to forgive yourself and realize that you're flawed and imperfect, then you'll also, so that's self-empathy, you'll also be able to extend that to other people. Yeah. And then when you're able to do that, and you have self-empathy and empathy for other people, and we're all this like perfectly imperfect, then people's critiques or judgments of you actually bounce off because they don't shame you anymore. So does that resonate?
Oh, it absolutely resonates, because, when you have that shame, there's this little pain point, right? And that person might not even have known that they were coming off that way. But yes, in the Moral Courage project, we talk about Bruce Lee and this concept of, being like water. So you can kind of there's these obstacles, and you kind of flow around them. You don't push back about them, against them, but you can take whatever comes at you with grace and just kind of move around it. And that person, you don't judge him or them, but that I don't have to absorb whatever that was. And it's not even to say, if I said this at the beginning, he may not have intended it, but he very well may have. So let me just be clear that that could be true. But yes, when we are really compassionate towards ourselves, then people can be their flawed selves around us, and we don't have to absorb that. The other thing I want to point out with empathy too is, when I was really doing the work on myself, what comes with that is compassion and empathy for my parents, my siblings, the people that I felt hurt from, and understanding they have their stories too, and they're doing the best that they can as well. And this is all good practice for, just staying curious and always thinking there's a reason for this person's behavior. Mm-hmm. They didn't just make it up in the moment. Their story is leading them to this moment, and, just honoring that and not judging it prematurely. Yeah,
because when we give each other permission to be human, we all benefit. And yes. I think that's such good soul food. Yeah. And what a great way to end our conversation.
I agree.
Thank you, Allison, so much. It was great. Information about the Moral Courage Project in the description below. Thank you for joining us at Purposeful Empathy. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.
What if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free from your thinking clutter, make that important decision, and liberate you from whatever's holding you back? At Grand Huron International, you get to choose the coach of your choice anytime from anywhere. Visit grandhuroninternational.com and harness the power of on-demand coaching today.